Okay, welcome to Global Moral Issues. Today we're just going to go over some of the basics of the course and of the discipline of global moral issues or global ethics, as we philosophers call it. And also just we're going to go over what the content is, how kind of the history of the discipline, and why the discipline emerged. It's a non-traditional field unlike chemistry or biology and whatnot. Okay, so first question is, why is this course novel? Why do you care? Well, like I said, this isn't like chemistry or biology or literature. So, and I'm going to note, a course like this, yeah, you're right, it wouldn't have been taught 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, or probably not even 50 years ago. And I think 50 years ago is the most interesting point. Your grandparents probably wouldn't have taken a course like this. So the question is, why? Well, before we answer this question, let's clarify the question. A course like this, with the scope of issues addressed, couldn't have been taught until very recently. Notice I say could not. Could not. Saying it wasn't possible to teach this until very recently. What do I mean by that? Well, it means a course that addresses global moral issues pertaining to ethics, human rights, global and regional organizations like the United Nations and the European Union couldn't have been taught until very recently. Further, prior to that, moral reflection on global issues would have mostly just dealt with war and peace. So what happened? Well, that's a good question. A lot of things happened. That is, what happened? Why has there only recently been academic moral reflection on global moral issues other than war and peace related topics? One, this discipline kind of emerged as a response to the horrors of World War II. The very unique horrors of the genocide associated with the Holocaust, just the fact that, we had countries in every continent just about involved in the war, just how much it disrupted the political relations in Europe and in Asia. And it's just, millions of people died. It was a horrific war. And, it left in its wake the Cold War. So another reason is technological innovations that limit the control governments can exert within their jurisdictions. So it's an interesting point. And they bring this up in the preface. So, for example, industrialization has affected culture, biodiversity, climate, oceans, atmospheres, and now space travel. So I said there's a limit to what governments can do these days. Look at that picture. It's a picture of an oil leak. Remember that oil leak that happened caused by British Petroleum in the Gulf of Mexico not too long ago? Many of you were at Purdue when this happened. Well, the Gulf of Mexico, I'm not sure if it was international waters or not, but it was a company that caused this environmental catastrophe that could have affected multiple nations. What can a government? So the actions of international corporations can affect many different states. And by states, I don't mean states within the United States. I mean governments, countries. We're competing for resources. Now space travel, it's becoming more privatized. The actions of non-government entities is now having global effects, where it used to be the actions of governing entities that had global effects. All right, another reason, this is, we're taking this class online, so it pertains to us, but new communications technologies make it harder to control the information available to a national population. So look at what Twitter has done, and Google and Facebook. Remember the Arab Spring that happened a few years ago? They say there was a social media revolution. WikiLeaks, the hacker group Anonymous, were catalysts. Of course, they didn't cause the revolution, but they played a part. I think Twitter played a role in the protests in Iran in 2009 when Ahmadinejad got reelected, and there was allegedly a rigged election. And many of the protests were arranged by that. So social media is having global ramifications, many political effects. And this is extremely novel. In fact, textbooks 10 years ago couldn't have really foreseen this, or 20 years ago, or 15 years ago. In fact, most of you grew up with internet. I didn't. I didn't get a computer with internet access till I was maybe 15. And even then, I'm considered that generation. So we are on the cusp of something crazy happening right now in the world. Another point is that many of the goods demanded by affluent consumers, like us, require ingredients imported from many foreign lands. And I said, like us, So like it or not, if you're taking this online global moral ethics class at Purdue University, a Big Ten university, you have what's called a high socioeconomic status. Now you might say, wait, whoa, I'm a college student. I'm broke. If I have a job, I make minimum wage. Socioeconomic, socio is the part where you fit in. You, and the fact that you're getting a college education in the United States means that you have high social status. And the fact that you'll have a 4-year degree does give you a huge economic advantage over people that lack a 4-year degree. So you are an affluent consumer. And many of the ingredients you consume come from foreign lands. And there's many interesting ethical issues that arise from that, many different perspectives. Again, trade has been going on, international trade has been going on for a long time, but the degree that it's happening right now is novel. The fact that there are international corporations, global companies now, that's novel. It used to be you bought tea from Britain or from India. Now you buy tea from companies that literally just don't have a home nation. In some sense, in many ways, they're more powerful. So this, of course, this demands just new type things that we have to think about. It's going to raise new issues that need more creative answers. Okay, so let's look at the kind of the brief history of academic reflection on global moral issues. Starting in the 1970s, philosophers began asking questions about how our new world modifies and enlarges the moral responsibilities of governments, corporations, and individuals. So it says modifies and enlarges. So the responsibilities of governments have changed, as well as corporations and individuals. Some unique ways. Different philosophers will have different answers to how the responsibilities of the three have changed. Like we're going to read an article by Peter Singer soon that says that we have moral duties to give a lot of our money. We have to sacrifice our level of comfort to aid people in other nations that we'll never meet, simply just because we have it. Now, I'm not saying he's right or wrong. I'm just saying that given that there's been a shift, people think that it's going to cause a shift in our responsibilities. It also says enlargement. So it's not just helping out your neighbor. Maybe they mean helping out people on the other side of the globe. We have the same type of responsibility, but more of it. But then we also, there's a sense we're going to have a different kind of responsibility. And of course, that's what we're address throughout this course. Corporations and individuals as well. And you're all individuals, so pay attention. Okay, some more items for the list. Academic reflection has largely been in response to the realization that world poverty has overtaken war as the greatest source of avoidable human misery. So we're going to spend the next few minutes talking about poverty. In fact, maybe it's just best to go on to the next slide. So in the preface to the Global Justice and Global Ethics anthologies, they both list basically some facts about how poverty has kind of overtaken war as the greatest bad thing that's happened. And they've got hardcore statistical evidence for it. So basically the numbers affected by war versus the numbers affected by poverty. We'll call the next few slides, "The World Sucks," or "The World's Just Not a Very Good Place." And it's true. I didn't realize this class was going to be such a sad class, but this is just the reality. So right now, 300 million people have died from hunger and remedial diseases in peacetime since the Cold War ended. So people are dying of basically hunger and curable diseases in peacetime. That's more people than war, during the 20th century at least. 830 million human beings are chronically undernourished. That means it's not just short-term malnourishment or undernourishment. It's chronic. It's over a long period of time. In fact, many people have grown up for a long time without that. 1.1 billion people lack access to safe water. That's something we take for granted. In America, we have, for the most part, very clean tap water, and on top of that, we still buy pure spring water. Whereas there are a lot of people that have access to very unclean water. So for those of you that live around Purdue, you've seen the Wabash River. That is a filthy river. For those of you in agriculture, you might know some of the reasons why. It just has something to do with how farming is done in the state of Indiana. Well, you don't drink the Wabash River water. You might have gone wading in it once or twice, but probably not because it's kind of gross. Some of the people on the Purdue team row through it, but imagine if you had to drink it. Imagine if that was the only water you had access to drink, to wash your clothes with. Imagine washing your clothes in the Wabash. you'd probably get sick. Not just being gross, but you could get sick. There's a lot of bad, nasty little bacteria in that water from agricultural runoff, from cow waste, fertilizers, and so on. Okay, well, 1 billion people drink water like the Wabash on a regular basis. And of course, that affects their life expectancy. They're gonna not live as long as us. It's gonna affect their long-term health. Okay, 2.6 billion people lack basic sanitation. I don't really need to explain it, but I'm going to anyways. We have plumbing. We have hand sanitizers. Our doctors wear gloves. They use clean syringes on us once and then they throw it away. They don't reuse syringes. Restaurants require their employees to wash up and follow these sanitation guidelines. We clean. We have all sorts of cleaners. It's a very sanitary place we live in. A lot of people don't have access to that stuff, and it's not because they're just dirty, filthy people. It's just they don't have access. They don't have the supplies. If you're running a medical clinic somewhere in a third world country and you haven't gotten the latest shipment of fresh latex gloves in, that you still have people to treat, the choice is between not treating them at all and them dying, or treating them without clean gloves. You're going to treat them. But so yeah, just stuff that we kind of, well, for lack of a better word, we take for granted. A lot of people globally just lack it. 2 billion people lack essential access to drugs. Not just talking about Advil for a headache, but I'm talking about you get the flu, you can take antibiotics. You contract many sexually transmitted diseases. Most of them have treatments. Most of them are treatable. It's just you get an infection, you get injured, you can get a tetanus shot. These people don't have access to this basic stuff. We have, there's a reason we don't have polio or measles or typhus, and this is or malaria. Okay, a lot of people lack shelter. I don't need to explain that. We all have a place to sleep at night. Even some biographical information about your instructor, Davis. I just had an electrical fire in my house caused by a lightning strike, and my house was deemed uninhabitable for at least 30 days because of the electrical wiring was damaged, and it's going to take construction crews at least 30 days to rewire the house. So in the state of Indiana, if you don't have electricity, your house is deemed uninhabitable. Well, I stayed in hotels that insurance paid for. I had friends. So, I wasn't on the streets once. I took showers every day. I did my laundry. I ate 3 meals a day. I missed out on a lot of conveniences, but still I had shelter. Well, and don't get me wrong, it sucked. I'd like to have my house back and be able to have my furniture and stuff. But that's not the same thing as not having shelter. A lot of people don't even have that kind of shelter. Refugee camps where people live in tents, muddy tent cities, and so on, etc. By the way, I say and so on, etc. a lot. I apologize, but it's just get used to it. Okay, lastly, 218 million children between the ages of 5 and 17 do wage work outside of their household. Between the ages of 5 and 17. 5 is a very young age to be working. We thought in America that it was an advancement, it was progress. When thanks to labor laws, we work Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We get weekends off. Kids below a certain age aren't forced to work in factories for 12 hours a day in incredibly dangerous conditions. We thought that was an advance. It was progress. That's one reason America is great. Well, in many places in the world, that is not a reality. Children are working, oftentimes in long hours and unsafe conditions just to survive, just to get probably less than adequate income to provide for just basic needs, food I'm talking about. So that's a few reasons why poverty is overtaking war, and a few reasons why also the world is just not a very good place right now. So some more items for the list. Oh, there's more. Yes, there's more. To add salt to the wound, very poor people, often physically and mentally stunted due to malnutrition in infancy, who are illiterate. By the way, you may take it for granted, but the fact that you all can read sets you apart from a lot of people. That is a skill that's going to get you far in life. They're illiterate due to just basic lack of schooling and much preoccupied with their family's survival. Who cares about having an Xbox or a latte from Starbucks if you can't have food on the table? Or for that matter, you don't have a table to put food on to begin with because you're homeless, because you're living in a refugee camp. And I'm not trying to make you all feel guilty. It's just these are the facts. But they're preoccupied with family survival. Well, these people, the people that are most affected by generally bad decisions made by governments, by other people, by other nations, by corporations, by and also victims of natural disasters. The people that are most severely affected are also the people that generally have the least amount of power. They can't harm or benefit like a politician or official who rules over them. Okay, so in the United States, you can always get a lawyer and sue. You can't do that in many places. In the United States, if you got a problem with your neighborhood, if you call enough people enough times and just get really annoying, eventually something could get done. Whereas these people don't have recourse to that. And the fact is, politicians, powerful people in general, aren't threatened by the people that are most badly affected by their actions. So such rulers, I'm not saying American politicians, in fact, most of it is not. We'll see that a lot of it is the governments of third world countries, but these rulers, I'm going to quote, have a much greater incentive to attend to the interests of agents more capable of reciprocation, the interests of affluent compatriots, foreigners, domestic and multinational corporations, and foreign governments. It's just like a ruler or a politician, they don't have much incentive to help out these people that are most severely affected by destructive policies. What can a starving kid in Palestine do to help a politician in the United States or Europe get reelected? It's not like they can give money to their campaign. So it's just the sad but true fact about the way the world is structured right now is that the people most severely affected have little influence over those who affect them. That doesn't seem up for debate. This is kind of like a lesson on facts right now. We're not going to any philosophical terrain right now. This is kind of the facts. Okay, so let's talk about, the authors think that poverty is the greatest catastrophe. More facts. 18 million people die from poverty-related causes each year, while at the same time we live in an era of unprecedented global affluence. This is where it gets interesting. According to the authors, and when I say according to the authors, that means I might agree with them, I might not. I'm not going to give my opinion. I'm just reporting someone else's opinion. Don't assume that I agree with someone just because I'm stating what they believe. So according to the authors, it's actually within our means to eradicate all life-threatening poverty. They're saying that they'd say a shift in the global income distribution of only 0.7% of global income, not a very big shift, would wholly eradicate the severe poverty that currently impacts 40% of the human population. Imagine making 0.7% less than you do right now, and then that eradicating severe poverty on 40% of the population. That's a lot. That just doesn't seem very demanding. So, some other facts, some economic inequalities. If anyone's taking economics or knows anything about political science and has something to say about this, agree or disagree, wants to elaborate, wants to challenge, get on the discussion board. Let's talk about it. I'd love to see this. This is interesting stuff. So in 2000, the bottom 50% of the world's adults had 1.1% of global wealth, and the bottom 10% had 0.03%, whereas the top 10% had 85.1%, and the top 1% had 39.9%. Okay, this is the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer argument. And people think this argument is persuasive because people tend to value equality. So an increase in inequalities tends to raise red flags. People think that's morally bad. Not saying that individuals are morally responsible. They're just saying, if you're going to say, is it good or bad that inequality is increasing? Most people would say that's bad. Okay? So here's a fact. Severe poverty is avoidable today at a cost that is tiny in relation to the incomes and fortunes of the affluent. In fact, at a much smaller cost than, say, what the Allies had to sacrifice in World War II. And they're talking about money and loss of life. There are lots of Allied military personnel, soldiers that died during World War II to kind of keep the global balance of power. And they're saying this isn't a loss of life. You don't have to take a bullet. It's a little bit of a redistribution of income. And we're not talking like Marxist distribution of income where everyone's equal. We're talking just like the wealthy will still be very wealthy, just have a little bit less. That's kind of what the authors are advocating. So right now it seems plausible. We're going to probe this deeper actually next week when we look at John Rawls, but throughout the semester some other pieces as well. This is food for thought. Discuss it. Okay, another fact. Economic inequalities are increasing. For example, the real incomes of the poorest 5% of the world population declined 20% from 1988 to 93, Another 23% from 93 to 98. So the real global per capita income, on the other hand, increased by 5.2% and 4.8% respectively. So incomes of the poorest is going down, whereas global wealth as a whole is increasing. So it's perplexing. Why is it happening? Is it bad that that's happening? What can we do to stop it if it is bad? And again, I think the common sense general opinion is that, not blaming anyone, just if you were to ask, is it good, bad, or neutral that global per capita income is increasing while real income of the poorest is decreasing? Most people would say, well, it's not a neutral fact. It's definitely got a moral value. And it's not a good thing either. It's a bad thing that that's happening. Okay. Fact number 3. Conditions of life anywhere on Earth are affected by international interactions of many kinds and the rules that shape such interactions. So this is a distinction that might make it onto a quiz, so pay attention. It's a distinction between inter and intranational. So inter and intranational economic transactions are influenced by a complex system of treaties, investments, patents, taxation, labor standards, etc., etc., etc. I won't go into too much depth about that, but I think it's pretty obvious. Well, you got to know what that distinction means before you really understand what it means. But first, the authors are going to say that these factors make the distinction between intra and international relations obsolete. So I just said you got to know this distinction between inter and international, but then this slide says that these are going to be an obsolete distinction. Well, before we can understand why it's obsolete, we should understand the distinction itself, and I still maintain that it's going to be important to remember. Okay, intranational interactions that occur within a country, between persons, households, corporations, and associations within a territorial founded society. Interactions within the United States or Britain. If you purchase a rocking chair made by an Amish person in Ohio, that would be an intranational transaction. Okay, international would be interactions between countries. Interactions between sovereign states. Okay, so that's the distinction. It's a pretty clear-cut distinction. Intra versus international. Remember that. Now, I told you to remember that, but I also said it's obsolete. Why? So I said previously this distinction held pretty tightly. Any interaction fit neatly in one of the two categories. A government back in the day also held internal and external sovereignty. What is that distinction? Well, internal sovereignty is the power and authority of a government to dominate other actors, persons, households, corporations, and associations in interactions within a region. External sovereignty is the entitlement of a government to act on behalf of the state with the governments of other states, make agreements, etc. So like a treaty between the United States and Canada would be the United States and Canada, using their external sovereignty, and a law passed in the United States that says that Americans can only vote once in an election would be internal sovereignty. So these two worlds, the internal and external world, the between states and within states, they're linked. But until very recently, they were considered separate, requiring different types of moral theorizing. Just like there's a sense in which theorizing about biology is different from theorizing about chemistry. Even though in some sense, chemistry applies to everything that goes on in biology. I mean, we're like the elements in the periodic table is what make us up. But in some sense, we have different laws of biology that explain, like the laws of evolution. And then, so chemists and biologists are kind of looking at two different domains. And so we just consider them separately. And it's kind of like the same thing between intra and international. They're considered just two separate domains. They don't apply to each other. That is not the case anymore. There's just a lot more interaction across national borders now than there was just interaction between governments. So it used to be that the only interaction between national borders was between the governments. United States and Canada, multinational corporations, social networking, environmental factors, international agencies have changed all that. There's just a lot more actors of different kinds than just governments today. And they act across governments as well as within states. So these interactions then have an undeniable influence that happens. Problem, they're really complex. I mean, they're like really complex, like really, really, really complex. Uh, but their impact is on everyone. Um, it's kind of like meteorology. The joke is the weatherman never gets it right, never can predict when it's going to rain or not. That's not completely true. The meteorology has advanced a lot. Um, it's just in the past 5 years, but much less the past 100 years, much less 50 years with Doppler radars. We have access to more climate data. We have satellites now. I mean, uh, it's never a surprise when it rains. But one reason why it was really hard to predict for a long time is just how complex it is. Weather is very complex. You know, the movement of molecules in the air and water molecules, you would think would be a big deal, but it's a huge deal. And there's a lot of complex factors. And it just takes a long time to figure out how to predict this stuff. I'm going to propose that global interactions between governments and corporations and individuals and agencies is, in one sense, it might be more complex. It's harder to predict. We'd like to think, like, for example, for you political scientists, you're scientists, you're right. You're in a science. You're studying the past, the governments and nations and how they interacted to hopefully predict the future, what it's going to look like. Economists study past economic interactions to predict the future, right? But the more complex it is, in some sense, the harder it is to predict. So regardless, though, and I mean, this isn't a science class, it's a philosophy class, so we're not going to try to predict stuff. But we do need to acknowledge that these are very complex, but they're going to impact you. Just like weather is complex, but it impacts you. Okay? All right. Economics is complex. It impacts you. All right. So another reason for basically why the distinction between inter and international is just not a big deal anymore. It's kind of becoming obsolete is that term globalization. Okay? You hear a lot about globalization. Either it's great or it's horrible. You know, it oppresses people, or it's the way of the future. It's what's making all this technology advance and why our world's more comfortable to live in. Okay. Well, regardless, globalization is one reason why the distinction is becoming obsolete. So globalization is the double transformation of the traditional realm of international relations. There's just more kinds of inter and international actors, and these actors have had more and more pervasive influence on everyone. So here's a question. And the answer was in the preface, if you read it, which you should have. The question is, why do theorists prefer the term global now to international? Think. Do. Answer. The term global reflects that there is more happening between national borders than merely interactions and relations among states or nations. So, what's the distinction then between seeing events? Okay, we'll come to that in a second. Let that sink in, what the term global means. International, I guess we could say it's like between states, governments of states, between Canada and the United States, between Britain and France, between Germany and Japan. Global would be like between Microsoft and a textile company in China, okay? Or between Starbucks in the United States and bean growers in Latin America. Or between Starbucks and a government in Latin America. It encompasses more. Okay, one more distinction. They ask, what is the distinction between seeing events interactionally versus institutionally? Okay, we'll go through this quickly. Interactional, events of the social world seen as actions and effects of actions performed by individual and collective agents. Institutional, events of the social world seen as effects of how our social world is structured and organized, of our laws and conventions, practices, and social institutions. This distinction between interactional and institutional events requires different types of moral analysis, institutional and interactional. So, who can illustrate this distinction? I'm just going to say, see page 19, Roman numerals XIX, for an answer to that. Anyways, like I said, I'm going to blow through this. I'm not as concerned about this distinction. And that is the end. And that is how my computer screen looks. See you at the next lecture.